I'm Kathleen Lacy, and you're listening to True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's November 20th, 2020. I'm John Swinimer. If you have a comment, criticism, or question, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Kathleen Lacy about WhitCAF 2020. The podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. And don't forget to check out the new YouTube channel. Hosted by the Whitby Library in Whitby, Ontario, the annual Comic Arts Festival celebrates comic book creators and makers in a variety of fun and entertaining activities, including exhibits, panels, readings, artist alley, contests, and more. Kathleen hails from Whitby, Ontario, and has studied animation at Durham College. She's also last year's adult winner of the Whitby Comic Arts Contest. She largely writes humorous and mildly existential stories about friendship, and spends a lot of time thinking about video games. Her most recent comic, Side Quest Log, is described as adventure fantasy, but with the approximate stakes of going to 7-Eleven at 3 a.m. with your roommates. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Kathleen Lacy about WhitCAF 2020. So, Kathleen Lacy, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Okay, thanks for talking to me.
Sure, no problem. You've been a past exhibitor at WhitCAF, so the questions tonight are pretty much focused on that particular event. So, curious if you could talk a little bit how you got your start in making comic books.
Well, I started sort of like most people, I imagine. I was drawing a lot when I was younger. When I guess it was around when I was sort of seeing what was like out there on the internet and discovering that stuff and seeing stuff like, wow, people can actually like make video games by themselves. People can actually make animations by themselves. And when I was about 12, I started posting my art and my comics on like a relatively small forum, and just through, I guess, meeting people there and sharing stuff there, I just sort of kept going and sort of kept doing that as social media sort of changed and what sites people were on shifted and whatnot.
Okay. Do you have any advice for anyone who wants to start making their own comic book?
It's a bit of a cop-out, but there's so much information available for free online. Also in books, like I used to take out like how to draw books from the library when I was younger, and that sort of helped me a lot at like a particular stage of my development. But there's so much stuff available for free online. There aren't, and to give specific advice, because even if people are starting out, they're starting out in different places and they have like different backgrounds. But generally, the sort of rules that are in place in comics in terms of the sort of guidelines people talk about for how you letter stuff and how you want to like space out a page, almost all of that ultimately comes down to how presenting something that is clear for the reader. So as long as you sort of keep the golden rule of trying to get across whatever it is you're trying to get across to the person who's eventually going to read the comic, that's pretty much like the only hard and fast rule. But like even that, it's comics are like very subjective. There's such a like wide range of them.
Okay, so I want to take a step back and perhaps get your opinion on the role that libraries and library events like WhitCAF play in fostering comic books and their creation.
Well, I already talked a little bit earlier about when I was learning how to draw when I was younger and actually taking library books out, and just not even just comics, but sort of creative stuff in general. I did a lot of library events when I was younger. I think a a few of them actually centered around comics, but those were like really good opportunities in terms of like, again, just like giving you the idea of like what you are able to do, like what the scope of things are. I have a fairly unique situation in that the first WhitCAF I went to, I wasn't an exhibitor. I had submitted a comic I made for the comic contest they'd
Oh,
done
okay.
in the adult category, and I actually ended up winning that year.
Oh, congratulations. That's great.
Yeah, so I was already kind of like keying up in terms of this is something I want to take more seriously. This is something that I like really want to polish so that I can do this professionally. And that was a moment of validation in terms of like, yes, the stuff I'm making like is good. When people, see it, they do like it. And I ended up reaching out later that year, and the second WhitCAF was my first time ever tabling at a convention ever.
Ah, okay. So it's different being on the opposite side of the table, so to speak.
Yeah, so there's multiple parts to that. There's the fact that these programs exist in the first place and allow people to engage with them, but also, for someone like me, it provides a bit of an entry point in terms of, being able to, display and eventually sell, and in a fairly like comfortable environment.
Right. Yeah. Something different from like one of those big conventions in Toronto, big Comic Cons or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, rather than committing to an entire weekend and like massive table prices. Community-based and library conventions are a really great place for just dipping your toes into the water.
Sounds good. Now, I know that you were mentioning some of your projects are on hold right now, but for people who want to find out more about your work and perhaps what you're up to in the future, where do you recommend that they go online to find you?
The best place to connect to everything is my Twitter, which is Rethy, RETHY_zone. It has links to my other sites. It has linked to my Tumblr, which will have like a backlog of art and comics that I've done over the years. Twitter itself isn't like the best at archiving that sort of thing, but I'll post art there, but mostly it'll be joking about video games and stuff, and I think it's pretty good. My comic is on hold, but I do have 2 complete chapters of that up as well that people can read.
Thanks to Kathleen for the chat. You can discover more about Kathleen on Twitter at RETH_zone. You can discover more about WhitCAF 2020 at whitbylibrary.ca/WhitCAF. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2020.